This program is made possible by generous support from China City, with locations in Oak Harbor, Freeland, and Mill Creek, Washington, as well as these local businesses.
Cynthia, I've enjoyed getting to know you over the past few months. Now it's time to take our relationship to a deeper, more intimate sexual level, said my boss, a white man 20 years my senior. No, I'm not interested, I said as my mind raced trying to catch up with what was happening. Was my boss really sexually propositioning me? I had accepted this job 5 months earlier in a health and wellness firm co-founded by this man. He was an expert in the field, and I was excited about working with him and being mentored by him. I had studied about him in my graduate program, and now he had crossed a professional boundary, and he had sexually propositioned me. My whole job, my whole career was in jeopardy. I was a single mother of 2 children, and I didn't quite know what to do. If I left my job, how was I going to feed my children? How was I going to pay my bills? If I stayed in the job, what did that require? Sleeping with my boss? He continued to pressure me over the next several days, and eventually I decided I needed to speak out. I did so with as much compassion in my heart in hopes of having deeper understanding and reconciliation. He did apologize, but unfortunately, the other senior leadership in the corporation retaliated against me and hired 6 attorneys to bring me down. I was forced to leave the job. When I left, I had a deep mistrust of men. I also didn't trust women because they had betrayed me too. They had to keep their position. After a lot of therapy, a lot of prayer, and about 2 or 3 years of time, I finally came to a place of forgiveness and trust again. Martin Luther King Jr. emphasized that injustice and corruption will only be healed and transformed if they're brought out into the light and not kept hidden. This is the power of the work that I am involved with. It's both the purpose and the methodology. That it's called Gender Equity and Reconciliation International, that my partner, William Keepin, and I co-founded. In our work, we create safe circles of women and men coming together, addressing the often sensitive and taboo issues around gender and sexuality. This is open to people of all sexual orientations, and we create these safe circles without shame or blame. When I was a little girl, and I would come up to a fountain, and I'd have a coin in my hand ready to make a wish, I would think, I want that baby doll, I want that baby doll. And just as I would let the coin go, no, I wish for world peace. My parents were progressive liberals in the 1960s, and they had my brother and me out on the streets marching against the Vietnam War, and also working toward the better relationships between whites and blacks. When I was 9 years old, I volunteered with other white kids to be bused across the city to integrate the schools. And what we found in the process were the black kids and the white kids, we all became friends. When I was a teenager working alongside with my mother, we worked for women's rights and GLBT rights. Martin Luther King Jr. was a real teacher for me and has been throughout my life. When he talked about the dream of little black boys and little black girls joining hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers, I held that as a prayer in my own heart. About a year ago, when I was in South Africa, and we had a circle of our work of gender equity and reconciliation, I looked around the circle at the dark-skinned and the light-skinned people, the gay, lesbian, heterosexuals, the people of different religions and different cultures, and I realized all of a sudden that that dream of Martin Luther King and my little girl prayer had become true, a living reality in my life. I'd like to share a story with you now about a woman that came to one of our workshops. I've changed her name for confidentiality's sake. Elena had held a secret, a family secret, for decades. When she came to our workshop, she started sharing a little bit at a time, first in the women's circle, and then later in what we call a truth forum, where the women are in the center and the men are on the outer edge in silent witness. Elena said that her husband had beaten her and her children for years. He often would hold the babies over the upstairs banister, dangling them, ready to drop them, and Elena was down below as a panicked mother, ready to catch them. At one point, he moved his mistress into the house and into Elena and his bedroom and made Elena and the children live in the toilet area from that point on. Elena was the breadwinner in the family, and one day she was in the kitchen cooking sausages in hot oil, and her husband came in demanding money for liquor. And she said, "No, I need this money for the children's shoes." And he became enraged and came at her with a knife. And just at that point, Elena picked up that hot skillet and threw it on that oil on him and scalded him. He charged her with violence, and she ended up in jail. She was the breadwinner, though, so that didn't last long because he needed the money to come in and the house to be cleaned. She lived with her children in this cycle of abuse for many years until his death. At the end of the workshop, Elena just was radiant and glowing, and she said, "I feel so liberated and free from being able to share my story in front of everyone, but especially the men." About a week after the workshop, we saw Elena, and she came running up to us, and she said, "Cynthia and Will, I have something to tell you. I went to my husband's grave the other day, and I sat at his grave, and I was able to forgive him for everything he had done. And then I knew where his mistress lived. I hadn't seen her in 20 years. And I went to her door. She opened the door, and she said, 'Elena, I've been thinking about you all week long.' She was in a wheelchair, and she said, 'I think that I'm in this wheelchair for all the cruel things that I did to you and your children.'" They were able to talk and come to a place where Elena was able to forgive her too. One important aspect of our work is at the final day of the workshop, which is usually 3 to 5 days, we have honoring ceremonies. The women create an honoring ceremony for the men and the masculine, and the men create an honoring ceremony for the women and the feminine. Now, we understand that 3 or 5 days isn't going to heal thousands of years of oppression and injustice, but we need to acknowledge and honor and even consecrate the work that we have begun. In Elena's workshop, the men escorted the women in and sat us in a semicircle. And before us was this tower of chairs, one stacked upon the other. And the men came forward and they said, these chairs, this tower represents the patriarchy. And we are dedicating ourselves and committing ourselves to toppling down and dismantling the patriarchy. And at that moment, they grabbed the bottom chairs and the whole thing came crashing down. And the women just sat in silence at the power of what was before them. And then the men came with a bowl of water, and they offered to wash and gently massage the women's hands. Most of these women, including Elena, had never felt the safe and tender touch of a man's hands before. The ceremony ended, and the women then offered an equally powerful ceremony for the men. And then at the end, we all came together and we made a personal commitment for the ways that we were going to bring gender healing forward in the world as we move from the workshop. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. Love is also the greatest need in the human family. These are just a few of the many women and men who are working in our work of Gender Equity and Reconciliation International, bringing forth healing of the gender divide, as well as not only equal rights and mutual respect, but mutual reverence for men and women across the globe. Thank you very much.